Warwick australiano originario de Canberra, con una trayectoria como periodista e investigador independiente, quien nos comentará de sus experiencias en Latinoamérica. Recientemente estuviste trabajando por un evento muy importante como fueron las pasadas elecciones presidenciales en Honduras el pasado mes. Cuéntanos cuáles fueron tus experiencias y háblanos del contexto de estas elecciones que se presentaron, el antes, el presente y bueno, cuáles son tus conclusiones de ese proceso de observación que realizaste.
En la semana antes de las elecciones hubo muchas manifestaciones, mucha alegría, mucho apoyo a la candidata presidencial, Xiomara, y sí, las banderas, las camisas, todo esto. Y
So, in fact, the manifestation of the social movement, it was active, it was happening in the context. What was your perception?
Yeah. The Frente, as they call it, was expressing its presence as a political party. It was a difficult decision for them to make because in a way it recognised the legitimacy of the coup, but they decided to just go along with that. And there was a sort of an assumption that this would correct what happened in 2009 in the elections then, when basically the Frente boycotted the coup regime and the elections.
Do you think that somehow, like, because what I have reviewed pretty much, it's like it was a controversial campaign, election campaign. On the one hand, it was accusations about it, part of like corruption at the moment to counting the votes, stealing the votes from one side to another side. It was evident that the candidate has the support of the people in somehow. The social movement were cheering here in somehow, but apparently the consequences were, or the result of the election was different. What do you think? What do you believe about that? And what do you? And I think that you also was close to some observers.
Yeah.
What do you think? What was the reaction? What was the formal reports that eventually you could see about it?
Well, it's very disappointing, Mario, that there wasn't more world reportage of what the observers saw. And I'm talking about, what I was trying to say was that in the lead up to the elections, there was already indications that the results would be affected. There was a climate of fear and kind of terrorism. Now, since the coup regime came to power in 2009, there have been, I think, 37 journalists assassinated, I think 111 campesinos in a controversial area, and even when the observers arrived, and it was, I think it's a big step to have observers there, because in 2009 most observers boycotted. But this time there are observers from all around the world. There was European Union, there were from the Organisation of American States, there was from the Labour movement in the United States, there was human rights observers. There were thousands. There was actually a Latin American brigade. Now, in the days leading up to the elections, for example, one busload of observers on the way to Rio Blanco were stopped and told, if you go in there, we can't guarantee that you'll get out. It was a very threatening situation. So the observers were threatened. In another, I think, Euro, one of the officers, the observers had actually been undergoing a training course from the electoral tribunal. You know, because that's what you do when you're an observer, they tell you what to look for. And immediately after the military came in and demanded their passports and asked them if they were in them. And the whole incident, I think 5 people were killed. There have been 18 people involved in the Libre Party, activists, people, high-ranking people, ranking in the Libre Party, have been killed since May. So there was a recognition there that there has been a campaign to deter people from voting, from getting involved with the Libre Party, and for campaigning. And certainly a lot of human rights people have also been killed, lawyers who defended them. There were, I think there have been about 2, maybe 3 lawyers killed. That's not counting the ones who get death threats, etc. But getting back to the observers, in fact I think the Aurora Hotel, where I think most of the international observers were, there was a sort of raid on that. And the guys, it's not just sort of people coming, excuse me, what are you doing, ma'am, or sir? The guys wearing balaclavas, ski masks.
All right.
So it's the whole context of the lead up to the elections was one of fear and intimidation. But nevertheless, people rejoiced and the people embraced the opportunity to vote. I mean, one of the things they used to do was to put their little finger up by voting. You know, it became like a bit of a symbol of how you felt. And there were thousands more Libre supporters, and they were for their colour was red, what they called the Blues, which was the National Party. And so you had that. You had an incredible, when we went out and visited all the voting booths, you know, there was this sort of festival attitude. And on the night, people were saying, oh, here, we got to vote. Oh, wasn't it great? And then they had a press conference at one of the main hotels, and we were watching the results come up, you know, the little pie chart with the graph, and we could see the Libre Party gaining the Blues. And I think around about 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, Giamatti came in, presidential candidate, and said, I believe that I can say I'm the president-elect of Honduras, and the noise was different. It was incredible. But by the time I got back to my hotel later that night, you know, the taxi driver asked me, what do you think of the elections? She was an observer, we've got to wait to see what the electoral tribunal says. By the time I got back to my hotel, the electoral tribunal had announced that the National Party had won. And so there was this huge contrast between the high of the night and later on in the night, the next morning. And there was a lot of trepidation because the people were saying, let's take to the streets. And I think there was a fear among, you know, the journalists and observers that it would turn into a repeat of 2009, people took to the streets spontaneously, and several of them were killed. And it inaugurated this whole era of repression. Unfortunately, Mel, the former president, and his wife held a press conference the next day, and they just sort of kept the lid on it. They just said, okay, we're going to challenge that result. We think they're fraudulent. They held another press conference later in the week, and again, you know, there was a huge, I don't know, there was an atmosphere of anger, enthusiasm, and they actually put up documentary evidence of the fraud, you know, the booze, the tallies that had been recorded and had actually been scanned and videoed did not correspond to the figures that hadn't been signed for by the scrutineers, did not correspond to the figures that the electoral tribunal had put out. Giovanna said, at the night, she said, well, the next day, she said, I think 20% of the vote had been recognised. At the end of the week, she said 800,000 votes had been stolen. And there were plenty of journalists and foreign observers who were willing to testify to that report. And it's quite important, actually, to look at what some observers said and what others didn't. For example, there was no recognition of the fact of the intimidation, the fact that Leave Day offices were raided and places where foreign observers were intimidated, and various people, I think 5 people assassinated the night before the election. Leaving all that aside, I actually spoke and interviewed, and I went to press conferences where the European Union observers said, you know, we'd seen this, we saw the army taking the ballot boxes, we saw people being intimidated. Nevertheless, the leader of the European observer team announced that he thought that there were some irregularities, but the elections were basically transparent.
No, that'd be weird.
Later on, a whistleblower came out and said, is actually, most of the European team thought that they weren't clean and transparent, but they were sort of bullied into sort of signing off on the leaders' result. He actually did his own press conference and sort of blew the whistle on that whole thing. I'm not sure what the Organisation of American States observers said, but certainly the majority of the independent observers said that they were deeply concerned and deeply distrustful of the results of the electoral tribunal put out, and they should not be recognised as neutral. But obviously you're not going to get that in the media. The reports coming from outside Honduras deny that.
So well, at the end, the current president is the official party, is the candidate of the official party.
The National Party.
The National Party.
Yeah. That's Orlando, Emmanuel Orlando.
What do you think that is necessary? Why do the world need to focus right now in Honduras? Why we have, because you're talking about that international observers some of them say that there was a transparent experience.
Yeah.
Other international observers say this wasn't a transparent experience. So, from your experience, from your own experience as an observer, what is happening with the system to choose observers in order to guarantee, kind of like a neutral view about what is happening, and eventually, for further situations, avoid that kind of like controversial decisions, because it's hard to believe if you bring help from overseas, it's in order to guarantee neutrality.
Yeah.
But in this moment, it's happening like kind of like controversial thing about what's happening. So what do you believe? What do you think about that?
Mario, it's hard to know where to start, but certainly when you're talking about the reaction to those results, just before I left Honduras, Annie Bird, who's been a long-time researcher and working out of the Human Rights Office, agreed with me when I said, the point of leverage seems to be with the electoral tribunal, and she sort of confirmed that the judiciary since the coup has been stacked, and the electoral tribunal in Honduras has been quite blatant in its attempts to fiddle the elections in the direction of the National Party, which is, they're actually appointed. The Attorney General, for example, was sacked after the coup, and the coup regime put in, Supreme Court judges that would basically be cronies, and that's very much part of the problem. I think one of the good things that came out of the elections was that the judges of the Supreme Court, most Latin American countries, are actually chosen by Congress. And that in these elections, although the Libre Party did not get a majority, it did break the two-party system in Hungary. And that while Annie, who is probably the most reliable researcher in the country at the moment, did not think that was sufficient to sort of clean up the judicial system. At least it was enough to maybe protect the 31 diputados or parliamentarians who are in the Congress, and I think there was something like 41 people elected from the Liberal Party municipal mayorships. There is hope that there will be a kind of an umbrella there for the Libre Party to contest successfully another election in a few years' time. As to the first part of the question, I couldn't even start to go into the reasons why this happened. Well, I will start. It is largely because the financial interests of mainly the United States, but also to a less degree Canada, are seeing Honduras, because of the corrupt oligarchy there, as a very useful area to make, I guess you say, social experiments, a social laboratory where they can bring in neoliberal economic policies, which they have been trying in other countries in Latin America, of course. But it's quite extreme in Honduras. They're actually talking about, and now that the new government has got in, it could very well happen, an idea that some neoliberal economists are setting up whole cities that have their own police force, their own constitution. They're actually above the laws of the country where they are. And these gated, so what do they call it? I forget the term for it, but they're basically gated cities that are totally independent of any kind of regulation. It's the next step, if you like, from what maquiladoras, the free trade zones where they set up factories, sweatshops, outside the control of any kind of regulation. You know, they pay substandard wages, the women have to fuck the boss. You know, and if they don't like it, they end up dead in the ditch. We've seen that on the border with Mexico. These model cities, as they call them, are the next step from that kind of economic intervention, which is supported by the military and the elite classes, the elite people who run these countries, who are incredibly corrupt. It's a bit of a joke. The American ambassador back when Zelaya was kicked out of the country, Zelaya thinks that when he goes to the city, he's not going to the capital, it's to Tegucigalpa. Where he thinks he's going to Tegucigalpa, he's going to the city. He doesn't realise that when the elite, most people who have the money to do it, when they say they're going to the city, they're actually going to Miami. So, you know, Miami is regarded as like the unofficial capital, if you like, Latin America. And certainly, you know, it's a bit of a sick joke, but this mentality and this group of people, I think it's about 12 families, who are running the country, have their own network, incredibly corrupt, they're tied in with the military, and they own the judiciary. So there really is no separation of powers as we expect in a democracy. That's one of the definitions of a democracy. So the separation of powers that you just, you know, if the judge doesn't say to the Supreme Court or the Attorney General doesn't say what you like, you get rid of it, put in your mates. And that's basically what has happened to an extreme degree in Honduras.
Oh, it's very interesting to know about Honduras. Really. What do you think? What is the future of the region in Central America in order to approach the union of Latin America with the thought what is happening in South America? What is your perspective about what is happening in Central America for Honduras and how it could be possible to link what is happening in the south of Latin America, where you have the bunch of countries that are trying to consolidate an idea. What is your opinion about it?
I'll say that one of the things, one of the reasons that there was a coup run against Noel Zelaya back in 2009 was that they thought he was getting too close to ALBA. And ALBA, which is the Latin American Bolivian Alliance, and I mean it's economically, it's underwritten by Venezuela and Venezuelan oil money, but it has given much of Latin America a degree of autonomy from the influence of the IMF and the World Bank and US financial interests, which I think in the past, I mean, some contradict me on this, but it is pretty evident now with new developments that in the past was based on keeping Latin America dependent on that kind of financial, economic hegemony. I think Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, certainly in Central America, the region we're talking about, Nicaragua has been a bad example to the neoliberal financial interest, but it's actually one of the few countries in the region that's going ahead. It's booming. People are neither undernourished nor overweight, as they are in most of the other Latin American countries. Honduras, I think, represents the main meeting point between the neoliberal the attempts to enforce neoliberal economic policies and the resistance to it. It's not just an economic battle, it's one that spills over into the issues of human rights and repression. I mean, the repression in Honduras is horrific, and Guatemalans know the kind of repression that's going on there. So the struggles that are happening is that, for example, one team of observers was stopped into going into an area where the indigenous people were trying to stop the construction of a hydroelectric plant. There's a guy called the Pawn King who is forcing indigenous people off the beaches so they can build up a tourist empire. The woman who, I had an interview with the woman who is in charge of, who's the dirigente, the leader of the Indigenous Rights Organisation, Berta Cáceres. She was under house arrest because the police planted a gun on her when she went down to talk to the indigenous people who were setting up a blockade to keep, gold miners and developers out of there. I mean, it's not just a struggle of businessmen and business houses and economics. It's that kind of struggle spills over into struggles of ordinary people, little people, struggling to keep their human rights and actually in many cases to stay alive. That's the way it works. And that's part of the regional struggle in Latin America, in Central America. And I'm not as aware of what's happening in the Southern Cone as you might be, but certainly in Central America there are linked struggles. There is currently the trial of Rios Montt in Guatemala. There's a struggle against impunity. In Honduras, the guys who ran the death squads in the 1980s are back in the saddle. In El Salvador, although the FMLN has a certain degree of power, a Supreme Court judge was sacked because he admitted the possibility that if the FMLN won the elections next year, they would prosecute some of the military responsible for war crimes during the Civil War in the 1980s. And that set up a bit of a panic. In fact, the Tutela Legal, which was a human rights body set up by Archbishop Romero back in the 80s, who was assassinated by a death squad, they said they were going to close down the office because they had all the records of these human rights violations by the military. And the military is running scared now because of the trial of Rios Montt, Guatemala, and the current president. So this whole issue of impunity and human rights involves both Honduras, El Salvador and Guatemala. So that is a linked struggle. And similarly in Guatemala, you know, there are Canadian gold mining companies and hydroelectric companies sending in despots or current, they call them something else now, they call them security guards or something for the business, but they're sending them in to, you know, assassinate community leaders who won't sell their property to the developers, to the business interests. And there's a trial going on in Canada right now, in Guatemala. So these are all interlinked processes, and certainly in Central America, I think we're looking at the possibility of you know, those three countries at least, and certainly in southern Mexico as well, in Chiapas, there are similar issues of being united in their struggle against that kind of oppression, which you know, translates back in the United States and places like Canada into neoliberal economic policies.
I would like to also ask you for about your day life work, which is currently in Nimby. We know that you also are part of an interesting project with a radio station, community radio station.
Yeah.
You were mentioned that, well, it's hard for people from common people do things, but I believe that this initiative about the project radio start like an initiative of minimum people or small people, that you want to use that expression, to get opinion, to well, you know, try to get information, try to go ahead. Well, this is the word of communication, but it's easier nowadays. So tell us a little bit more about your project, what's happening in Nimby, what eventually are the objectives of the project, and what is your experience with this nowadays that you are seeing different...
well, you know, in Nimby we have a community radio station, and most cities, you know, Nimby is in the city, but there are community radio stations all around Australia, and certainly ethnic broadcasting, which because here in Australia we have many we have people from many countries, many of them who were refugees from America from the wars of the 80s. But I think it's absolutely essential. It's like Archbishop Romero, he was assassinated because he said, I try and speak for those who have no voice. And okay, we've got commercial radio, we've got John Laws, we've got Alan Jones, and we've even got quite harmless commercial, but you can't get away from that. And the arguments about the ABC, you know, because it's not commercial, it comes under criticism. But it is a voice, and I think independent radio is absolutely essential, and I hope with so many things being cut in Australia at the moment, that community radio does provide a voice for, and it is community, it is communitarian, if you like, as that people can get up and people I think bloody idiots. They can get up and self-work, you know. And so that people don't feel disempowered simply for the fact that the airwaves are dominated by the commercial radio. I think it's absolutely essential that this happen and that we maintain this. And like my personal, tells me about my project, I mean, I do podcasting, and I think, you know, the internet has been, you know, it's mind-boggling. It spins your head around. what you can do with it. We're still learning what we can do with it. But certainly in the community radio is just like something that, okay, you don't need to do it round the clock, but you decide there's someone out there saying something you like, you can hear them, you can listen to them. And in Australia, it's just, okay, it's just on the maintenance level of getting people's voices to be heard. I can tell you that in Honduras, it was a community radio, but there was a radio station that allowed talkback, and they were actually shut down. In fact, during the elections, they put troops around their transmitters. It's called Radio Global, if you want to check it out on Google. And it was very important for people organising the resistance and the protest against the coup back in 2009. You know, they kept people informed of what was going on, where the tanks are, where the demonstration is, who's been taken by the security forces, where they're coming from, you know, and that was absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. And I hope we can keep it going here in Australia.
What is the message that you'd like to send to Latin American audience for this program? It's important mostly to participate in these kind of projects, and how we can find you in the website and in the worldwide to listen and follow your work.
Okay. Well, I would say to all the Latin Americans here listening in Australia, there is strength in solidarity, there is strength in unity. Your struggle, the struggle of Colombia, the struggle of El Salvador, the struggle of Guatemala, the struggle of Honduras, Mexico, it's the same struggle. So get behind it. And I guess the other message is that one of the ways of doing that is to tune in to your Latin American ethnic broadcaster, support him or her. Listen to the program, tell your friends about it. My own program is on community radio TuneIn FM. 102.3, which you can pick up on the web on nfm.org. I think its sister radio station is 2XX Canberra. I don't know the exact website, but there's a great comrade there who does good programs. And I'm sure there are other community radios in Sydney. My blog site or website where I do podcasts is vensol.blogspot.com. VENSOL vensol.blogspot.com. But probably if you just Google Latin Radical, it'll pop up. And I hope you enjoy the show.
Well, thank you, Warwick, for your time with us and for this update about Latin America and in particular for Honduras.